Hi, this is Linda Carbino. I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Walking Through Life. Today, I have two guests. First, I have Michael Hartman, the Commissioner of Mental Health here in Vermont. And then I've got my absolute favorite guy besides my husband, Marcus Helijas Welby. And he is the most huggable guy in White River Junction, just so you know. So today we're going to kind of have a conversation on ins and outs about mental illness and addiction issues, if that's okay. And I know you don't know me very well, but you got to take me with a grain of salt because I do have a little bit of a personality.
Okay, well, I will do that.
Anyway, if it's okay, we'd like to start with Mark and have him share a little bit about the turning point, what started, what happened with Linda, and the success story she turned into.
Okay.
And Marcus
that I
Welby?
can do. That I can do. Well, it's delightful to be here, and it's great to have you on the show. It's terrific that Linda is doing the show at all, and especially because I remember when. And if I can briefly tell the story, when I go to the legislature or wherever I speak, other states, wherever it might be, I typically tell Linda's story because it's such a poignant, powerful, and poster child sort of story, if you will. And that is that I met her when I came to the Turning Point Club at the end of 1998. And she drank, she drugged, she smoked. She burned herself with cigarettes. She cut herself with razor blades to let the pain out. She weighed over 300 pounds. She had very few teeth. The ones remaining had little enamel as a result of bulimic vomiting. She had frequent panic attacks and hallucinations, and she couldn't read. And my experience at that point was that she was the unhealthiest human being I'd ever met. And today, and for quite some time now, she hasn't smoked, drank, do drugs, hasn't burned herself, cut herself, got a new set of teeth, lost over 100 pounds, got a job, became a taxpayer, and then, of course, a month or so ago, the governor of the state of Vermont was on her show here with her today. And I just think that that's an absolutely remarkable story.
Now, on the road to recovery, I got to tell you a little story about that, too, is that when I first met Mark and he showed up at the Turning Point, he did not know anything at all about what happened at the Turning Point. So I was there, I was a volunteer most of the time. I loved volunteering there. So I was able to help him find out where everything went and where everything was. And he took the project and he ran with it. But in the same sense, he soon found out that I couldn't read. Of course, that was something that I was ashamed of, and I didn't want to let anybody know.
Right, you'd hide it well, I assume, right?
Yes,
yeah.
I was very good at that, and I had suffered from the hallucination part and all that. It was kind of like what they called borderline personality. Sometimes you have different personalities, and that's what I'd suffered from. And but the thing that helped me the most as far as my recovery was the day that Mark came to me and he goes, "Linda," he says, "you're here a lot as a volunteer." And I said, "Well, yeah, and I absolutely love it." He goes, "Well, how about if we make you the volunteer coordinator here?" A volunteer coordinator, not a job, but a volunteer job. That was one of the greatest gifts that anybody could ever give me, because in the sense he was telling me, you're well enough to do this. And, and I think when people tell you you're not, you kind of believe that, you know. And here's Mark giving me every opportunity to participate in life, to start over again, to help others. And I think that's when I first realized that, you know, I'm not the only one. Not only that, but I have a purpose, and my purpose is to help others.
And you didn't really hear this from other people before
Exactly.
this?
And in school, as a matter of fact, because of my mental illness, they released me from school early at 15, and I went out on my own. And because of my mental illness, my mother couldn't handle having me at home. So I was stuffed into a group home, and my family life was not very good at the time. And now I look back at it, and my mother had every right to be able to do that, because if you got somebody that's self-abusive, you know, and you've got 3 other children at home, obviously you've got to make a choice there, which was very hard for her.
Yeah.
So being on my own at a very young age, I learned a lot of hard knocks. And you know, I think that's why I'm so avid about being a peer support specialist. And my thought is, with the Turning Point Club, such a wonderful place, just an idea for me, is that I'd like to see some help with them, helping others. In other words, you know, like peers like me. Maybe if we had a little, I don't know, incentive for, you know, like maybe somehow the mental health program can maybe help pay us a little bit to help be a peer support specialist. And in turn, it would be helping the Turning Point too. Because what the Turning Point offers, and he's like a therapist down there. I'm not kidding you. And there is such a need for the Turning Point, you know? I cannot see us losing the Turning Point. I can't. And it's not only that, but my husband suffers from schizophrenia too. And Mark and the whole family at the Turning Point has become our family. You know, it's a part of us. And that's my feeling around it. And I know that I'd like to get your opinion. What do you think about those ideas? And can we get help for the Turning Point?
Yeah. Well, you know, Linda, what occurs to me about what you're saying, number one, is the need for providers in the mental health system to always be aware of what kind of messages they're giving to people getting services about their abilities. And a few years ago, back in the late 1990s and early part of this decade, most of the designated agencies, the mental health centers in Vermont, did have some work with the Dartmouth Dartmouth College in terms of learning about supported employment, which is a model that's very much sort of one of those things that just makes sense. And it sounds like Mark was one of those folks who already knew how to make sense and didn't need to have that kind of training in it. But in terms of really approaching people with mental health issues, of saying, you know, what do you want to do? And not that you have to first, you know, you've got to have this kind of clothing, you've got to do this with your hair, you've got to say this, you've got to be able to fill out an application. That what we're trying to do in our system is to make people aware that if somebody wants to work, that's the first piece to work with. And that work and employment is such a huge part of recovery for most people. You know, my experience, before I came into the job as commissioner, I worked at Washington County Mental Health up in the Montpelier area, and I was head of the Community Rehabilitation and Treatment Program. And one of the key pieces that we implemented in terms of working there is looking at employment as being just as important as housing, just as important as medication, just as important as any other service that's given by the center. That once people start working and they have that sense that you're talking about, that sense of I can do things, that I belong someplace, that there's a place that I need to be, things that I need to do for people, that starts a whole series of changes in how we think about ourselves and our lives, and starts promoting the thoughts that, well, maybe I could try something else. And as you and I were talking before the show, you've gone, and as Mark was saying at the beginning, you've gone from a place for yourself where you needed somebody to just say, I am somebody.
I give you a chance.
Yeah. And how about if you do this?
And that's what Mark gave me. I mean, I'll never be able to thank him enough in that.
And the other part that struck me about what you were saying is the question about peer services, because I think that I was just out in Phoenix, Arizona at a nationwide meeting of commissioners of mental health authorities in different states. And one of the things that we were really focusing on there is what our systems need to be doing to help people, but also to not get in the way of recovery. And one of the presentations there was more by two people from Georgia. And you mentioned to me earlier Steve Morgan's article in the Counterpoint. And Steve is one of the people who actually was part of this training project in Georgia to certify peer folks to work in the system and be able to actually not even work for agencies or other mental health authorities, but actually for nonprofits such as the Vermont Psychiatric Survivors to be able to actually bill for services themselves and do consumer-oriented services. And what you're talking about in terms of the program at Turning Point seems exactly like the kind of things, well, these are the kind of things that almost all the literature talks about, either with mental health or substance abuse or persons with both disorders, that the ability to have somebody who has been where you are and can tell you, you know, it's okay some days if you don't feel like you want to get out of bed, but you got to do it anyway. I mean, when I was working in Washington County, we employed consumers in the program to do peer services, but for years we didn't have a peer as the supervisor of that program. Once we started doing that, it changed the whole way that the program started operating, because what the non-peer supervisor couldn't do is if you called in sick, they would say, oh, that's okay, Linda, we understand, you can't do this. And they would kind of reaffirm what you were talking about earlier, that it's okay if you don't contribute, it's okay if you don't
Until
do
they
things.
got sick of it, and then you more than less get fired.
Right.
You know, and that's another thing, is there's a big stigma around mental illness and the co-occurring disorders and stuff. And I think Mark and I both worked on those two issues too.
Yes.
But I think I want to relay is that people with mental illness, they shouldn't be treated any different than, really,
Well, that's,
except for they got to be, I mean, but I think it's easier if the employer understands what the mental illness is and what the limitations are. But then in the same sense, the person with the mental illness get help around.
but the problem is the stigma issue, as you said.
Exactly, yes.
That if you tell your employer that you have a mental illness, are you putting yourself in a position where suddenly they're going to think, well, as soon as we can let go of this person, we'll do that.
Right. Or it happened to me when I happened to get a job and they knew that I suffered from some anxiety. Well, then I went through the training, and because of the first time of anxiety, they're like, well, we knew it wasn't going to work because of your illness anyway, you know. And it made me feel worse. It made me feel a lot worse because they were expecting me to do bad. So the minute something happens, it's like, let them go.
And my experience of when we moved a peer into being the supervisor, the peer was able to talk to peers about missing from work and really be able to delineate that there are sometimes, I think as you were saying, that you're having a downtime in terms of the depression or psychosis, whatever is the issue for you, that sometimes you do need to pull back and slow down. But that sometimes you also need somebody to say, no, you got to do this. This is your job. You've got to do it. You know, you have a mental illness. Maybe you have a substance abuse problem. Maybe your knee hurts. But you got to get up and put in your time.
That's it.
And that kind of message is affirming that you're worthwhile. That it's important that you do what you are expected to do.
And just don't give up so easy. Don't quit. Don't whatever.
Right. And you know, and I think that as we were talking earlier with Mark about the Turning Point Club in general, that the issue that you're facing down here in terms of your space and the need to have some kind of new place to operate out of to be able to do the kind of services that you're talking about in terms of people helping each other.
And you know, and with me being volunteer coordinator too, I was able to do just what you were talking about, push the people to go a little bit further.
Yes, and so when we were talking, Mark, about the Turning Point Club has been here for 9 years?
Well, it's actually been here since 1992 as an AA club, but it was kind of reopened, if you will, in late '98 as a recovery center.
And now you're in a situation where you've got to have some new space to operate in, and we were talking about how we can try to figure out a way that the state and other folks may be able to help you to get through this kind of looming crisis, I'd say, of what's going to happen next. Because you have, how many people come into your program in the course of a week or a month?
In the course of a month, we have about 3,500 visits. I think that in general, that's about 250 to 300 distinct individuals with multiple visits, of course. And we've been successful thus far in finding other funds above and beyond the state funding that we receive. However, as everything rises, the state funding has become a significant piece, but it's not enough for the White River turning point, and it's absolutely not enough for the other newer centers, because as I had mentioned, the Burlington Turning Point Club has as many visits as we do, of course, because it's a huge population area, and their rent alone is $40,000 a year, and the state funds that they receive is $47,000. So that doesn't even cover the insurance, utilities, telephone, much less staffing, of course. So it's tough.
And in your time of, you've been here since 1998?
Yes.
Yeah. So what would you say, you know, when I was listening to Linda's story, I was thinking that there used to be a pretty big divide sometimes between mental health and substance abuse, even on the peer level. And more and more I hear stories as Linda's where people are saying that it's really a combined effort between different kinds of services that help them the most. And I'm wondering how that works from your perspective down here.
In my mind, it has become a less touchy subject over time. I think that there's an educational component that goes on simply by having people of all sorts of diverse backgrounds and issues be in the same place. I once wrote a letter to Paul Jarris when he was the Commissioner of Health about this issue, and what I had said at that time is that we operate from the notion that our common welfare must come first. And so from time to time there is an individual whose symptoms of mental illness are dramatic enough and challenging enough that they're not well suited to the Turning Point Club, only because more people will choose not to come as a result. Now that's an unfortunate occurrence, but disregarding that once every year or two kind of occurrence, I would say that 60 to 70% of the people who come through the doors, they're coming because of an addiction issue primarily. However, 60 to 70% of them have a co-occurring mental disorder, whether it's depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, you name it. And first of all, they're not all declared co-occurring disorders or medicated or diagnosed co-occurring disorders. But I know that my personal experience has been that 18 years ago I had a major clinical depression, and I spoke about it in places that it used not to be spoken about. And in the Upper Valley, at any rate, it's acceptable to talk about those things as well as medication now. So I think that it's improving. I think that by and large, it's not a big issue. There are still certainly people, judgment and stigma and prejudice is a big issue across the board in these topics. And some of us with co-occurring disorders and whatever come with our own prejudices and judgments.
Just like everybody else.
Right. So we're not purely victorious, but we're moving in the right direction.
You know, I was thinking that about the co-occurring piece, and this has been something that has just recently, in terms of the last 10 years, been something that's emerged more and more, recognized that this is a problem that people used to find if they had a mental health disorder and a substance abuse disorder and they went to a substance abuse treatment facility, that they'd be told, well, you got to stop your mental health medication in order to be here. And that would, maybe they would stay in the facility and reach some level of sobriety, but then they would leave and they wouldn't have their medication, and often not having their medication would lead to using as a way to cope.
Self-medicate.
And vice versa, that people would come to mental health agencies and be told, you got to stop using before you can get help here. And we've certainly changed that issue, but that we still find the stigma
Unfortunately.
of people not really understanding the interplay with these disorders.
But that doesn't mean that they don't want to understand.
Right.
It's just a lack of education.
Right, right. And
So
how
that's-
much these things can really,
How can
one
they
thing
be helped?
affects the other so much. And also about the sense of how somebody's struggling with these issues, as you were, Linda, in terms of being able to step out and start going to work. That's really a pretty amazing step. But, you know, when we've looked at Vermont, we're very lucky in terms of persons with significant mental health, mental illness. In Vermont, our rate of employment is somewhere usually between 27–33% for people between 18 and 64.
It's not very much.
It's not very much, but you know that's actually double what it is in most states. But one of the important things is that when we've ever surveyed, when I was working at Washington County, whenever we surveyed people, and I know this is mirrored on the national level in terms of surveys done for the same group of folks with mental illness, that actually about 70% of people would like to be working. So even though we may have double the number of people working than most states, we still only have half the number of people working who really want to be working.
Yeah, and can I give you a little insight on that?
Yes.
From what I see when I went out job hunting. It's kind of like, you know, you get in your stomach, okay, well, I'm going to try, but I don't feel like I'm going to succeed, but I'm going to go try anyway. And you're filling out the application. You don't know how to spell education. Or you look at it and you say, okay, I got a 5th grade education. It says, what education? What college? You know? There becomes a fear of, well, they're going to look at that and not hire me anyway, you know? Or, you know, if you have to give references and you don't have none, or you haven't worked for a long period of time, or whatever. And that's why I think what I can feel from being somebody that went back to work, what vocational rehabilitation status, I think needs, for me anyway, would need to get a little more involved in researching what type of work goes with what person. You know what I mean? Because I tried out for a job that obviously I wouldn't be matched to, you know, but I wanted to do it, a paying job, you know, I just wanted to do it. I didn't care whether I knew how to do it or not. I just wanted to do it, you know. So then lo and behold,
I suspect that has a lot to do with all of your recovery.
and you know, I think now that I am recovered as far as mental illness, and, you know, recovering from alcoholism too, I think that my mind has so much in here that I could help people like you understand ways of helping people as devastated as I was at that point. You know, get them involved in the community, get them involved in the Turning Point Club. You know.
Yes.
One thing you said, you were talking about educational levels and that. I just kind of want to point out, because you know, the viewing audience has their own conceptions of mental illness and addiction. There are people who are highly educated, highly motivated, have had challenging jobs in the past, who have either developed an addiction or been diagnosed with a mental illness, whose functionality at the moment has been significantly reduced. And the subsequent loss of self-esteem, the subsequent lack of belief in themselves, trust in their self-confidence, and all of that sort of thing, leads people with significant backgrounds in the same dilemma and challenge as you were discussing.
Exactly.
And so it's kind of across the board. And a lot of folks don't know that.
And I think that you know, when people start going to work and start engaging,
you feel
in recovery,
better.
You do. And the other thing that isn't much recognized about that is that when we talk about the folks who have serious mental illness and are able to get up and go to work, that one of the things that's also happening is that they feel better about themselves. It also allows some extra money, because many people who are on SSI or SSDI for their only income are living at below the poverty level.
Yeah.
And by having a part-time job, are able to get themselves into better living situations, and that also starts enhancing a sense of how you're doing with your life. And that, you know, in the end, annually now, we have folks working who are in our community rehabilitation and treatment programs, the program for long-term mentally ill persons, that those folks are actually earning over $5 million a year annually in Vermont, paying taxes. Also, for some of them who are working to a certain level, they're actually decreasing the money that they're earning through SSI. And so that basically these folks are proving that everybody can be part of the community, and everybody has a role in the community, and that they're contributing not only the time doing things like what you're doing when you were doing the volunteer piece, but also that they're actually tax-paying members of of the community.
And that's why, you know, I would say, and I know Turner Point's got the funding for it, but I would say I would love to see some help for the Turning Point, maybe to get some funding to pay people, you know, that maybe have mental illness and addiction issues to do exactly what I did: answer the phones, be responsible for training volunteers, you know, having parties for the volunteers. Oh, that's more fun. I love to have parties. Don't worry.
You
I
do.
love parties. Yeah.
You do.
But wouldn't that be great if we had an opportunity like that, you know? And if, for people to care about my recovery and wanting to see me succeed. And
to celebrate it.
Exactly. I mean, I've got so many people that come up to me all the time now. Linda, I'm so proud of you. Linda, you've changed so much. And you know, I mean, it's even like Steve and Bob here at CTV. They tell me how proud they am of me. And you know, if they told me that before, I would have said, yeah, they're just saying that, you know. But there's something inside of me that's changed, that I truly believe when people tell me things like that, that it's true now.
Yeah.
Whereas before I was in recovery, I didn't believe it. I often thought that, oh, they were just saying that to be nice, you know, because I'm not worth it. But I am.
And that's such a big piece that's such an important piece of changing in terms of one's own recovery, is
Exactly.
really starting to have value of self. Yeah.
I think that if there's any one thing, I mean, I could go on and on about why I think recovery centers might work, for example. What I said when the governor was on, and I've said it before, is that at base, and perhaps it's most profound, is that it's a safe place, a friendly face, and a hot cup of coffee. But what it really is that people find a home with other people who are willing to talk about the truth of their lives, and as a result, they live, and so do other people. And it sounds simple, but I get tingles when I hear myself say it, because it's the greatest reclamation project on the planet. I mean, it's, you know, and for me to have witnessed Linda and a host of other people, it's a great gift to me.
Yes.
And it hasn't hurt my recovery any either.
So my question is, I appreciate you being here today and coming. How closely can I work with you in getting all this stuff going?
Well,
Can I call you?
I think you know my number and my email and my,
I do.
And my snail mail now. You know, I think that what I can tell you is that we are continuing to try to devise ways that all of the funding that comes down, whether it's through the alcohol and drug programs, through the mental health programs, or through health programs, how we can use those the most effectively towards recovery. And as I said earlier, I think that one of the things that it clearly shows, I got to say that I think I've seen employment as being as strong of a tool for recovery as medication, or
Right.
as therapy, or even as teaching other kinds of skills. That when I've seen people take a job and go from sleeping, 20 hours a day
Yeah.
to sleeping 8 hours a day and looking for 2 jobs to have. I've seen people lose 100, 150 pounds. People who were in a program that I was overseeing. We had a program for persons with diabetes, and that people, when they would get a job, it would just change so rapidly. Within 6 months, their health would improve tremendously. The A1C counts, which need to be under 6 to not be a diabetic, for many of these folks were 13 and 14, which are extremely high. And within 6 months of working and doing these things, they would bring it down to 6 to 7, and start really reorganizing their lives. So their health would improve, their mental health would improve, their housing situations would improve, their relationships with people around them would improve. And I think, as you were saying, Mark, the issue of people being in a program like the Turning Point, where they can come in when they need to,
Yep.
and when they want to, not at 2 o'clock for a 50-minute appointment, and be able to sit down and talk with somebody. That kind of telling your story, it's a form of what Michael White calls narrative therapy, where you talk about what your life has been, and almost by talking about it, it reconfigures in your own mind the significance of things in your life. And sometimes that reconfiguration is a way of kind of starting to reorganize the bad experiences, the difficult times, and find a way to accept them as, okay, so I had my hard times, and a lot of things weren't fair for me, and difficult for other people around me, as you were talking about with your mom and your home situation. But that you can find a way to make that into strengths, or at least not have it be a weight on you. Because not all bad things aren't wonderful badges of things.
And not only that, doesn't mean that they can't change. I mean, I
Right.
remember my mom died like 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember when I came back from California and I got into recovery, it was like she showed up and she started being very proud of me, and she goes, "Now that's the daughter that I remember." Big difference.
That's a pretty
I
powerful
got
thing.
exactly. My whole family was. I mean, it was like it changed my life, because at one point, you feel like you're not part of the family, and then all of a sudden, because you step forward and you've taken responsibility and you change your life, they're there. They want to be a part of that. And today I can honestly say I got all my sisters, even though my mother passed away.
Mm-hmm.
I've got all my sisters. I've got my family, and you don't know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, well, maybe you do. But you go from nothing, and then all of a sudden you're surrounded, and it's just wonderful.
Well, those pieces of self-acceptance and acceptance by other people who are important to you are just key. And when you can get the opportunity, as you did, when somebody like your mom is able to say that and see you get into recovery before they die, that's such a powerful piece, because so many people who have rugged lives lose contact with family, and
that would happen.
Family lose contact with them, and misunderstandings and disagreements grow into very thick walls that never get breached. And it's wonderful that happened for you.
And that's another reason why the Turning Point is so valuable. There are people, like before I came in, that was totally lost, that had no place to go, And this place became my home, still is, And I was hoping that maybe you and Mark could work together and maybe come up with some kind of a plan for the future of the Turning Point.
Well,
You can hire me. I want $10 an hour.
I got to tell you, though, that we have a situation with the state that we can't just hire people right now.
Oh, you can't hire me? Darn.
We've got our own financial issues of trying to reduce the employees in the state government. So, but what I think is that I assume that Mark, you've had conversations with Paul Dragon. In the Integrated Services Initiative.
Actually, Paul Dragon is going to be doing the show here.
I'm glad I got here before him. And you really ought to make sure that Paul understands the whole situation here. And, you know, because one of the things that Paul's project, this is the Vermont Integrated Services Initiative, has done is really started to pull all these threads together in terms of, a couple of weeks ago I met with the PATH homeless providers that run the shelters around the state. And what Paul's been able to do is start working with them to learn co-occurring disorders, interventions and promotion of getting treatment and care. And he's also working with the federally qualified health centers and the substance abuse providers and the mental health providers. And overall, we're also trying to work with the private mental health community. And trying to configure how can we utilize everybody's best efforts into a system of care that is flexible enough that somebody can come in to a Turning Point Club and say, you know, I'm not ready to go down to healthcare and rehabilitative services. I'm not ready to go to Serenity House. I'm just going to come here and have a place, as you were saying, I think, Mark, you know, so many of the folks who have co-occurring disorders especially have a history of trauma. And a place that can be safe, as you were saying,
Absolutely.
to come in and know that you can come into this place and you can talk about who you are and what your life has been, and that you're not going to be abused and you're not going to be taken advantage of or made fun of. That kind of safety is often the first steps for people to be able to then start going into really exploring how they can change their lives. And so, you know, my hope is that Paul's project, because Paul is a joining piece. The VC program is a joining piece between health, mental health, substance abuse. And so what we're trying to do there is to figure out what are those resources, and can we deploy them in such a way that we're talking about making sure that there's the Turning Point Club in a community available to somebody to walk in the door, all the way up to an inpatient hospital bed that is going to cost as much in a day as you're paying for rent for a month. And how do we make sure that all those components are there so that if people only need that first piece that's peer-oriented and helpful, and maybe that's all they'll ever need. I mean, you know, that people don't necessarily need to come into a mental health center or a substance abuse center sometimes. Sometimes it's that they can come into a peer-supported environment and find their pathway through there. Other folks have different kinds of needs, but we need to be able to meet all of those
All
needs.
of it, yeah.
Right.
Not just one or not just the other.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that we can
absolutely.
find ways to keep supporting those.
Well, one of the needs, of course, you mentioned is housing, whether it's shelters, whether it's longer-term things. And the organization that I run is called the Second Wind Foundation. It used to be called the Upper Valley Substance Abuse Foundation. And 4 years ago, we opened up a facility called Willow Grove, which is a transitional residence for women with young children. And what we found is, and we had this as a prerequisite before policy and procedure before we even opened, was that the women, when they came, needed to find employment. And it makes all the difference. That's point one. The other thing is that while it was funded by the Office of Drug and Alcohol Programs, every single woman that we have had come through, which is, you know, approaching 100 now, has had a co-occurring disorder. And we provide case-managed services, room and board, and we do that at $40 a day, which, when you think about transportation, room and board, case management, is pretty inexpensive. I mean, I'm bringing this up not that you can solve the problem, but our budget was just cut. It threw a huge challenge to us. And perhaps I need to do a better job of identifying other potential funding streams given the nature of what services we are providing and who it is that we're providing services for.
Well, as well as can the whole system find ways to help you do that? I mean, that programs like yours shouldn't be left to kind of, well, if you can make it, and if you can't, too bad. But how can state and other nonprofits help each other to identify where there are opportunities to supplement other supports that you have in order to make sure that when you have these events happen where you're going to have to move out of a space, and as you were saying that the spaces around the Upper Valley here become more and more expensive, so you know wherever you go it's going to be more expensive than what you're already paying, and that we have to have a social fabric kind of situation here where we know that we can find ways to help organizations when they go through those periods of transition.
And I think that's great. So I can assume that you and Mark are going to talk on the phone.
Well, I
Right.
expect we will.
And
if
I
we
can
don't,
assume
you'll
that
probably
me and you are
call
going
me
to
and
talk
tell
on
me
the
that
phone.
we need to.
Between all three of us, hey, we're going to become good friends. But anyway, I think we will cut the show off right now. But what I wanted to tell you is thank you so much for coming.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
And I hope, see, the governor said he'd come back, so I hope you'd come back too.
Okay, well, I will.
And of course, we always have Marcus Welby. But anyway, this is Linda Carbino, and thank you guys again for being on Walking Through Life. And we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Linda.
Thank you.